Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. We will just give another 1 minute for people to join because I can see a lot of people are in the lobby. So please hold on for 1 minute. All right, so we will start. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. I am Sid. I'm really excited for this next 1 hour that we will spend with you. Before we begin, few housekeeping rules to keep in mind. All your cameras have been disabled and your mics have been muted. There is a Q&A box that you can use to ask questions. We will consolidate all the questions from our side and try to take them towards the end. We have kept the last 10 minutes of this webinar for questions. We will start with a very quick round of introduction. I am Siddharth Agarwal and I go by Sid. I am leading our efforts for one of the client who's a top 50 ranked CPA firm and provides them due diligence services from India. In this role, I am responsible for running buy side and sell side engagements for them. Prior to joining Windy Street, I was working with EY India as a senior manager, and cumulatively, I have more than 120 M&A deals experience ranging across multiple sectors, geographies, and target sizes. What do you, Saurabh?
Thanks, Siddharth. Hello, friends. I am Saurabh Agarwal, working in Windy Street as a vice president. I am handling a team of diligence professionals for our client based in US, which is one of the top 100 CPA firms. And prior to joining Windy Street, I worked in EY global team as a diligence manager and have supported the front end offices of EY in US. So overall, I have an experience of over 10 years in diligence and have worked on over I'm in relation to outsourcing in this webinar today. And thanks again to everyone for your gracious presence. Now, Siddharth is going to walk you through the contents of our agenda and discuss our insights in more detail.
Thank you, Saurabh. So I'll provide you a very high level overview of the topics that we are going to cover as part of this webinar. Before I get into the specifics, we do know that outsourcing is something that most firms recognize as an important strategy to take. They understand that this has become a necessity, but what we often hear firms talk about is they don't know how to start, they don't know what work to outsource, and typical challenges around that. So in this webinar, our intention is to cover the specifics there so that you have actionable items coming out of this session. So we will start with the first section, which is on why outsourcing. We will discuss why do firms typically outsource, and most important consideration for firms who have not outsourced to really evaluate and self-assess why do they want to outsource. Then we will get to what work to outsource, just understanding the talent pool available in the market and deciding what work to outsource. We will then discuss the prevalent outsourcing models that are currently operating in the industry. We will then also talk about the key considerations that you should keep in mind while evaluating an offshore partner. And towards the end, we will discuss the onboarding process and typical challenges that firms face while outsourcing. Like I mentioned, the last 10 minutes is reserved for questions, and we will try to take all your questions then. So why do firms typically outsource? Now, the big firms, big fours, and the large firms have been outsourcing for several years now, and they have been exploiting outsourcing benefits since so many years. The typical reasons why firms look to outsource is recruitment challenges. Now, there is an acute talent shortage in the US. As per the stats, more than 300,000 accountants have left their jobs, and the CPA enrollment rates are going down. What outsourcing does is outsourcing provides you an access to a large talent pool. In India alone, there are approximately 3,000 quality of earnings professionals. Because the firms have been outsourcing for a pretty long time, there is a matured talent pool that you can access. While India's CA, which is a CPA equivalent term, is also seeing slight decline in enrollment rates because of the population and because quality of earnings is still considered a preferred career choice in India, there is still, a large amount of people who are interested in doing quality of earnings work. With outsourcing, you can tap into specialized skill set. You can probably get people who are experienced in running engagements from India. You can also get people who are experienced in specific sectors. As an example, if you are looking to hire someone who has done waterfalls in healthcare, you will get people with specific waterfall experience. The next benefit of outsourcing is better project economics. Now, there is an inherent cost advantage in outsourcing. In addition to the cost advantage, what outsourcing also does is it helps you gain a competitive advantage to your pricing. It also helps you add to your top line. Like we have had several case studies where we have seen firms expand into different industries and firms being able to take up different projects. As an example, doing sell side deals is always not economically beneficial, but with outsourcing talent pool at your disposal, you can always get to things like sell side deals, excuse me, or roll forward, or some of the other deals that are not very healthy in terms of project economics. The next advantage is outsourcing solves attrition risk. Now, it will not kill attrition, but it will diversify attrition between your on-site team and your offshore team. Another important consideration to keep in mind here is for a country like India, the notice period that an employee serves is typically 2 to 3 months. So even if there is an attrition in your offshore team, you get 2 to 3 months of time to hire a replacement, which is enough time to hire a replacement and have seamless onboarding. And in India, people actually serve notice period, they actually work during the notice period. And the last one is the volatility in M&A market. Now, because the deal volumes are so volatile, firms are skeptical in incurring a front loaded cost. So, what outsourcing does is it offers you multiple options to choose from, and you can choose your cost commitment levels so that you can align your revenues and cost. Now, we've discussed typical reasons why firms outsource, but it is important for you to self assess and evaluate why you want to outsource. What are the problem statements that you are trying to solve by outsourcing, and accordingly design your outsourcing plan. Typical reasons that we have seen our clients complain about and reasons why they outsource includes they need someone who can run deals from India, or there is a high attrition risk that they want to manage, or they want to have a competitive pricing in the bidding process. And don't be surprised if you want to outsource for probably all of the reasons that you see on the screen. Now I will hand it over to Saurabh, who will discuss how to outsource and what work to outsource.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. While most of the on-site teams consider outsourcing as a necessity, but there are a lot of things that needs to be answered before building an outsourcing strategy, like questions like how to outsource, whom to work with, and what work is to be outsourced. So before answering these questions, let's understand the talent pool first. So in the context of outsourcing, to understand the talent pool, our focus is on India as an overall market for QE professionals, mainly because of two reasons. more than first is like more than 40% of the top 100 CPA firms outsource work to India. And secondly, while there are few countries like Philippines, Mexico, probably South Africa, but India is still considered as the outsourcing capital of the world. In India, QE talent pool is highly concentrated to Big Fours and Big Tens, which is unlike US, where there are like small and medium-sized firms as well who do a lot of quality of earning work. So to drive a meaningful comparison amongst the available QE talent in India, we have divided the talent pool in three buckets based on our understanding of the overall market. So the first bucket is the India practice offices of Big Fours and Big Tens like PwC, EY, A&M, BDO, and so on. Professionals in these companies typically have a front-end role, and their experience is similar to on-site teams in US. One of the most important aspect here is that these professionals are capable of running deals. These are typically qualified chartered accountants, or you can say CPA equivalents. One aspect that is generally missing here is that these professionals have no or very minimal US deals experience, you can say, but this is something which can be easily learned on the job. For example, my co-host Siddharth is from EY practice office of, he's from India practice office of EY, having a front-end experience, and within a span of few weeks, he's now leading deals for one of the client in US. Oh, but one thing to note here is that it is difficult to hire people from this pool because of the general perception in the industry that outsourcing is a back-end job and is not as exciting as a client-facing role. Coming on to the second category is the global delivery centers of Big Fours and Big Tens, like EY, PwC, A&M, and other large firms who are supporting the US offices. So professional working in these firms typically play a supporting role in terms of project delivery. Here, average integration you can say is approximately 30%. However, there is a small pool of professionals in this bucket who are capable of operating at higher integration levels around 80%, or in some cases even leading the deals. So for example, I myself comes from the global office of EY and have been leading deals for our client in US. I have led around 30 deals for the client based in the US over a span of 3 years. And talking more about this pool, in terms of qualification, this pool comprises of qualified chartered accountants, MBAs, and semi-qualified professionals. But the most important aspect here is that these professionals typically have experience of working on US deals. Thus, they are pretty much familiar about the different data structures like QuickBooks, NetSuite, the having the monthly financials, uh, and they are pretty much familiar with the US work ethics, or you can say US style of working. So it is important to note that this pool is the largest pool for outsourcing considerations because of two reasons. First, this pool comprises of almost, you can say, roughly 65% of the total talent pool for QE in India. And second, that these professionals makes a best fitment in terms of skills required to perform typical work procedures in the outsourcing space. And last but not the least, the third bucket is the independent contractors like Windy Street, who have a mix of professionals coming from front-end offices of Big Fours, global delivery centers, and the homegrown talent. Thus, overall, it is safe to conclude that there is a diverse talent pool available in India, and it is quite important for the on-site team to do a detailed evaluation of the candidates. Sometimes resumes can be misleading. Thus, in India, it is quite normal to ask detailed questions to evaluate the technical skills of the professionals. So we have a sample of we have few sample questions which you should ask in more detail to judge the experience of the candidates. Some of the questions includes like number of deal worked on, average integration levels, experience in report writing, and if yes, which all sections they have written, discussing about quality of earning adjustments, net debt items, correlation between quality of earnings and net working capital, which is quite important. So overall, you should ask more probing questions to judge the depth of the knowledge of the professionals. Overall, most of you will realize by now that understanding the talent pool is very important aspect, as this is going to set up the context of your outsourcing strategy. So now moving on to the next section, after
Sorry, Saurabh, we are not able to hear you. Maybe he's facing
what
some tech.
word do we want to India? Is it good
Saurabh, sorry,
now?
we lost you for the last 10 seconds. Yeah, if you can repeat.
Is it good now, Siddharth?
Oh, yeah, loud and clear.
All right. Once you understand the talent pool in India, next stage is to ask yourself, what work do we want to outsource to India? And this is a very critical process, as this will determine the level of experience you want, and accordingly, which vendor can be a. This is super important because if there is a mismatch between your expectations, your team, then you will never be satisfied with the quality of work, and the on-site team may not enjoy working with the offshore. Vice versa situation could also happen. Based on based on our knowledge and outsourcing experience, we have categorized the type of work in three buckets based on the level of complexity. So the first level is level one, or you can say the basic level. This typically involves percent. Typical things that an on-site team will need to do here are like providing the source files like trial balances, GL detail, and other supporting files to the offshore team, then providing detailed instructions to the team, calls to discuss the status updates, and to answer the queries of the offsite team, as because most likely you will be working with.
Sorry, I'm sorry, but we are still
And
getting
here
some.
the
Sorry, I was just saying we are still getting some technical issues from your side. Maybe I can take this section of Saurabh
I'll
if you're
just
okay. All right, so guys, I'll take it over. Apologies for that. So, like we were discussing, what we have done is, for your convenience, we have broken down the different levels of outsourcing into three parts. Level one is the basic data book preparation level. Now, this is where, a large part of outsourcing right now stays. The average integration here is 30 to 40%. Now, integration is a very common term that is used in outsourcing. Integration really means that what portion of the overall work was performed by the offshore team. In terms of hours, it is probably signifying the quantum of time that the offshore team has charged on a particular project as a percentage of the total project hours. Things you need to do in this level is you need to provide trial balance, GL dumps, and other details to your offshore team. Maybe provide them detailed instructions and have regular calls to discuss updates, answer questions, and discuss priorities. Now, offshore team at this level would do the entire data book buildup, including income statement, balance sheet tabs, cash proof analysis, and also other data plotting tasks. The level two of outsourcing is what we call the ideal level. Now, this level includes complete data book and analysis. Teams performing at this level would do the complete data book preparation, including participation in management calls and identifying and calculating all the adjustments. The integration here is 60% to 80%. And in this level, what you need to do is to maybe provide them the access to the VDR, because the teams operating at this level would be efficient enough to go through the VDR themselves, update the information request list, understand what data has been provided, and accordingly act on it. The touch points can be less frequent because you're working with a diligence experienced team here, and there is no need to provide detailed updates. One thing that the on-site teams will have to do while using outsourcing partners are or is to schedule calls, especially the target calls during US morning time so that the offshore teams can join. And the level 3 of outsourcing is the end-to-end delivery stage where the integration is 80% plus and it goes as high as 95%. At this level, you have to review the final deliverables. And one typical problem that we see teams face in this level is if the end client is not aware about your offshoring strategy, there can be increased coordination efforts from your team to keep offshore team fully updated with all the discussions that you're having with the end client. Moving ahead, now we will discuss the prevalent outsourcing models. Now, before we get to what type of models are there in the market, it is imperative for you to ask yourself, how many offshore team members or man hours do you really need? What level of cost commitments are you going to sign up front? And whether you want to do outsourcing for a long term basis. Now, the market is full of outsourcing vendors, and there are a lot of models that are floating around. For simplicity, what we have done is we have broken down outsourcing models into three buckets. The first one is a dedicated team model. Now, under this model, you work with a dedicated team who will only work with you and not work with anyone else. You pay for the full year cost, which is for 2080 hours. And the benefits that you get under this model is you get to work with the same team. So there is a learning curve advantage. You can build rapport with your team, train them to do diligence your way, and have long term learning curve advantages come out of it. This model is typically suited for firms who want to do outsourcing for long term, and this is also a defined outsourcing strategy. The next bucket is on demand. Under this model, as the name suggests, this is on demand, so there is no or very limited commitment from your side. So you may pay a high dollar rate per hour because there is a low commitment. Now, this model offers flexibility. It is ideal for someone who has not outsourced before and are looking to test waters before they really make an investment in outsourcing strategy. This is not recommended as a long term strategy from our side because you may not work with the same team under this model. So there is no or limited learning curve advantage here. And the third model is a hybrid. Now, hybrid is a balance between dedicated and on demand. So the commitment levels vary, and this really depends on the vendor you are evaluating and the way they have designed their model. Under this model, you may work with the same team. Again, it depends on how they have structured the model. So this is a very broad classification that we have done on outsourcing models. Now the commercials may differ. You may pay under a per FTE model basis, or by the hour, or may pay on a blended basis. But what is really important is to keep aside the commercials and really understand if you are going to work with the same team as part of your outsourcing model. And from our experience, if you work with a dedicated team, there is going to be limited or very less quality issues, and that will give you long term successful relationships. Moving ahead, now we will discuss how to evaluate an offshore partner. Now, outsourcing has inherent challenges, so it is very important for us to choose the right partner. One of the important aspects that you should evaluate while you are evaluating a partner is the leadership skill set. Now, because every other Indian is doing outsourcing, what really happens is in order to have a full bouquet of service, people are offering audit services, tax services, and also quality of earning services. As part of your evaluation process, it is very important that you understand what is the firm's core competency and if they are actually experts in doing diligence. The next important consideration is client references. It is perfectly normal to ask for client references, and our recommendation is that you talk to at least two clients to better understand how their outsourcing journey has spanned. There is no reason to believe that your journey is going to be different from the existing clients that are working with the outsourcing vendor. The third consideration is interview. Now, we've already discussed how diverse the talent pool in India is, and the experience is very wide. You get people who have only done data books through people who have run deals from India. So, one of the very important consideration is you should always have an option to interview the offshore team before you work with them and choose your talent wisely. Historical attrition also becomes important because nobody likes attrition and it it is very high in the QE outsourcing space because people are not happy with the quality of work that they're doing under outsourcing or they have learning aspirations to do more. So it is really important for you to understand what historical attrition percentage has been for your outsourcing partner and then make a decision. The next important consideration is working hours. Now, because India operates in a different work shift, there is a limited overlap time between India and US working hours. From our understanding, you get 3 to 4 hours of overlap time. But because quality of earnings work is client advisory and there can be odd days when a report delivery is due and you may need access to the offshore team for an extended period. Or it is not always possible to schedule calls in the US morning time. So flexibility is very important and you should really understand from the offshore partner what their working hours are and how flexible they are to accommodate odd hours request. The next consideration is onboarding time. Now, onboarding time differs depending upon the model you want to choose. As an example, if you go for the dedicated team model, where you are trying to handpick your talent by interviewing them and have a dedicated team who will only work with you, it is impossible for any vendor to start sooner than 3 months because, like we discussed, the normal notice period that professionals serve in India is 2 to 3 months, and the interview process also takes some time. So, unless a vendor is trying to clear their bench, setting up a dedicated team will take some time. But if you're going for, say, an on-demand model, maybe the onboarding time will be immediate or anytime soon. The next important consideration is contractual matters. Now, this is where I will spend a little more time. We have tried to break contractual matters under four uh, subcategories. The first one is relationship. If you work with an independent contractor, the nature of relationship is not employer-employee. The offshore team members are actually employees of the independent company and they work with you as contractors. So you will not be responsible for their employee benefits slash taxes. Next category under contractual matter is termination. Now, the termination differs again depending upon the model you choose, but typically the notice period or termination clause will range from anywhere between 3 months to 12 months. If if you're working with an independent contractor who's setting up a dedicated team who will work with you, they will ask for a higher termination or notice period clause. So while evaluating offshore partners or talking to them, keep an eye out for what their termination clause is. Solicitation is pretty generic, where it will not allow you to solicit offshore team members. And the last category is non exclusive arrangement. If you work with an independent contractor, The arrangement is always going to be non exclusive. They will be allowed to work with other companies like yourself. You may have exclusivity on the team that you are working with if you are concerned about confidentiality and data security, but the overall company will be still non exclusive and will be able to work with other companies like yourself. Data security is probably one item that you will have to work on as part of the onboarding process. There is very little that you can do on data security as part of the evaluation process because it really depends on your internal IT setup and the way you want to handle data. But as part of the evaluation process, it still is an important criteria. So you might just want to understand what level of seriousness the vendor shows regarding data security, what type of certificates they have, and how adaptable they are to work as per your requirements. And last but not the least is culture alignment. One thing that we have seen is if the culture between your team and offshore team is aligned, if the employee policies are comparable, then people bond better and there is a long-term partnership. Moving ahead, we will discuss the onboarding process. Onboarding is very important because there are a lot of firms who have different experiences from outsourcing. And we do know that outsourcing as a strategy has been working for the big and the large firms. So, as a model, this is successful and proven. Where firms typically go wrong is, the way they are doing outsourcing. What we have done on onboarding is we have categorized again the section into three buckets. The first one is pre-onboarding. As part of the pre-onboarding process, one of the most important thing that you will have to do is educate your team. You will have to discuss the offshoring strategy with your team, discuss the economics and the reason behind you doing outsourcing. It is important that you also discuss the work expectations that your on-site team should have. It is also important to understand that there is going to be a ramp up time that the offshore team will take. It will not give you immediate results. So, level setting expectations with the extended team is important. We have often seen people who have not outsourced before be slightly reluctant or hesitant, while uh, working with an offshore team member. So, you have to drive that strategy as management and probably have some KRA factors or criterias to boost outsourcing. The next important item under pre-onboarding is set up IT protocols. Now, this is where a bulk of your pre-onboarding process will go. And on the IT, it is important for you to understand if you are okay with the idea of sharing data with someone who's outside the US territories. If you are not okay with the data leaving US territories, you can work under a VDI setup. But if you are okay with the idea of data going outside US territories, there are multiple ways in which you can set up best practices to exchange data. So, set up IT protocols would really depend on your take on data security, what your internal IT controls and policies are, and accordingly set up best practices. Change in engagement letter is one other thing that you have to do as part of the pre onboarding process because you are going to work with a subcontractor. We have often seen firms change their engagement letter to mention the fact that they are using a subcontractor as part of the delivery. The next process is onboarding. Now, as part of onboarding, we recommend firms doing a team introduction call. And during the onboarding week, it is also recommended to have your offshore teams go through the redacted data book and reports so that they can familiarize themselves with the formats that you follow as your deliverables and the way of doing diligence. Third important item under onboarding is identify single point of contact on both teams. Now, one thing that we have seen from our experience is once you start working with an offshore team, there is a common tendency that for all mistakes, offshore teams become responsible. So it is very important to have single point of contacts on both sides who can advocate for their respective sides. and have a meaningful conversation. Having Spock also helps in just bridging some of the culture gap, communication gap, and trying to iron out all these problems. The third section is ongoing process. As part of the ongoing process, it is very important to agree on a call cadence. There is a common tendency again to have email exchanges and not talk on calls. Our experience is that calls are always helpful than emails, so agreeing on a call cadence is very important. Recommended solutions here are having a scheduling call every week to discuss the overall pipeline of work, discuss availability, and accordingly allocate work, and then having regular project update calls to discuss and answer questions and share priorities. The next part in ongoing process is institute a feedback process. Now, having a two-way feedback process is very critical. One of the reasons why outsourcing relationship fail is, as an example, if the on-site team is not happy with, say, the quality of work on any other aspect, they don't share the feedback with the offshore team. Unless you share the problem statements with the offshore team, you are not giving them an opportunity to solve the problem. So it is very important to have a regular feedback process. We are doing project wise feedback on most of our clients, and this has been helpful so far. So, our recommendation is to have a very strong feedback process and make that process two-way because, like I said, there can be instances where, say, the on site team is at fault. And the last important aspect here is track utilization. If you are paying by the hour, this becomes important to track time because that is the amount of dollars that you will pay them. And if you are choosing a dedicated team model, then again, utilization becomes important because you have to optimize the dollars you are paying. So if you're paying them for the full year, you would want them to be fully utilized. So having a timesheet process and tracking utilization on an ongoing basis becomes very important for a successful outsourcing relationship. Moving on to the next section. Now, this is where we will discuss the typical challenges that we have seen firm face as their outsourcing strategy and what has been the key contributors for those typical challenges. Now, the most important one here is quality of work related issues. Now, work quality issues may range from things like checks and balances not tying out, or sources not matching, or offshore teams are not paying enough attention to reconciliations, or maybe they are not thinking in a holistic way, they are following a task based approach, and then etc etc. Key contributors around work quality issue is that there is no internal review mechanism that is designed by the offshore team. If you're working directly with junior team members and there is no manager on the job or a senior manager on the job who will review the work, you will face continuing quality issues. And this also is important because, like we discussed, the talent pool is so diverse that you may make a mistake while choosing the talent. Maybe your work expectations and the diligence skill set of your talent pool is not aligned. The next typical challenge that we see firms face is expectations evolve. Now, like we discussed, there are different levels in outsourcing. So imagine you decided to work with level one as part of your outsourcing strategy, and with time, you would want to move to level two. So if you have hired people to do data books, you cannot expect them to identify and quantify QoE adjustments. And the common problem here is because there is no strong L&D process, learning and development process for the offshore team, they remain under equipped and they cannot jump from level 1 to level 2 on the job. So it becomes important for you to have the right offshore team composition so that there is a manager or a senior manager on the job who can review work, train the team on the job, and meet their learning aspirations. The third typical challenge that we see firms face is time zone difference. Now, a large part of this is inherent, but the important problem that teams face here is flexibility. Now, like we discussed, when you have a report to due, say at noon Eastern, you would obviously want your offshore team to be available. So you have to agree on an overlap time and best practice to make sure that your offshore teams are available. And the last but not the least is communication problems. Now, a lot of this is because of the team composition. If you're working with junior team members, you are bound to have communication problems, or the best practices have not been defined. As an example, if you don't have a process to do a daily update call regarding the project updates, you may have communication problems wherein you don't really know what your offshore team is doing and you have no status update from them. To have a feedback process is also very important so that you can exactly tell them what their mistakes were and hope that they don't repeat it in the future. So these were the typical challenges, and if I were to summarize this, I would say that choosing the right offshore team composition is very key in making sure that you don't face these typical challenges and have a very successful outsourcing relationship. Now, this is where we come to the end of the webinar, and I know we have still 8 minutes to go, but I would open the floor for questions. So there is a Q&A box, and if you have any questions, feel free to write your questions, and we will try to answer them one by one. So we have our first question. We will send as a follow-up a copy of this presentation to all the attendees. So that's an affirmative answer from our side. And to add to that, we've also prepared a couple of checklists. As an example, we have discussed the key considerations for you to evaluate outsourcing partner. So there is a checklist that we have prepared for that and for the onboarding process. So we will send that also to all the attendees. We have our next question. I'm just reading the question. So normally our employment letters with our employees have 6 months to 12 months of non-compete, and there is a standard NDA clause that we have in all our employment letters. So on-demand model, like we've discussed, is a model where you don't have to pay for an upfront cost because the commitment levels are limited. Under that model, you may pay at a high dollar rate, but that is really useful for someone who's not done outsourcing before or is looking to test waters or evaluate a particular vendor's skill set. Now, there are not many firms who offer on demand, especially for quality of earnings side. And you may have to really ask your vendor as part of the evaluation process if they can do a demo project or if they can work under on demand model. So till now, I will be honest with you, we have not had a chance where we are working with listed companies or working on transactions where listed entities are involved. But internally, we do have a process wherein, on a regular basis, employees are disclosing all the shares that they hold in their name and including their dependents, and that is tracked and maintained in our database. I hope that answers your question, but if not, I will take follow ups. There is no specific ramp up time that an offshore team will take. It really depends on the skill set. But normally, from our experience, we would say maybe couple of projects is bare minimum that you would expect an offshore team to work on before they can come fully up to speed. There aren't more questions, so maybe we'll keep it open for another minute to respect everyone's time. There is one more. Typical working hours, I can speak for India. Like normally, India work shift starts at say 10:30 in the morning India time, and it ends through generally speaking 9 p.m. in the night. Uh, if I were to convert them to Eastern time, I would say we start at say 1 a.m. Eastern and then work through noon Eastern. So that is the normal work shift. But then again, there is flexibility that you get as part of your discussions with offshore partners. There is no average attrition rate, I would say, because it really depends on the company. But I do remember reading an article where Deloitte's attrition, I think, for the last year was 23% in the outsourcing space. And from our understanding, I think it typically ranges from 20 to 25, generally speaking. So maybe that is the average. Any other questions, guys? And we are available on email. So if you have questions, you can always follow up. All right, so looks like this is it. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this session was useful for all of you. Like I promised, you will get a copy of this presentation along with those checklists on email as follow up. And again, thank you so much from our side. I hope all of you have a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for taking time out to attend our session.